Right now, as you hear these words, a freight train is crossing the border between Russia and Iran. This is not fiction. This is not speculation. This is happening now, today. Satellite images prove it. In November 2025, for the first time in history, a freight train departed Moscow and reached Iran without passing through a single sea route controlled by the West. While Western analysts obsessively debated sanction packages and naval blockades, Russia quietly completed the decade's most consequential infrastructure project. And what you're about to discover will completely change your understanding of the future of global power. Let me show you exactly how it works and what it means for the world we know. The International North-South Transport Corridor, the INSTC, 7,200 kilometers connecting Moscow to the Indian Ocean. A treaty signed in 2000 that everyone ignored. Until now. And what happened next shatters everything you've heard about Western sanctions and their power. In 2024, it moved 814,000 tons of cargo, up 28% from the year before. And that's just the start. Because while the West was obsessed with trade wars and financial sanctions, something fundamental shifted. Russia broke free from the geographic cage that had kept it dependent on Western maritime power. And it did so not with missiles or cyber attacks, but with tracks, ports, and a geography most people never studied. Let's understand why this matters. For centuries, controlling maritime choke points meant controlling global trade. The Suez Canal, the Bosporus Strait. These aren't just convenient routes, they're surveillance points, control points, and when needed, blockade points. Every nation moving goods between Europe and Asia had to pass through these narrows. Whoever controlled them controlled the flow. Russia faced this problem constantly. Its access to global trade depended on sea routes other powers could watch, tax, or shut down. That was its geographic trap. The invisible prison. Look at the numbers. Shipping from Moscow to Mumbai via Suez takes about 40 days. Via the INSTC overland route, 24 days. Nearly half the time. And it bypasses every Western control point. But that's not even the key part. The key word is multimodal. Trains from Moscow to Caspian ports, ships crossing the Caspian. Then rail and road through Iran to India. Each leg uses the most efficient transport for that stage. It's not a railroad. It's an integrated system. Rails, ports, ships, roads, designed specifically to bypass traditional maritime power. Here's the crucial point most analysts miss. This corridor has 3 routes, only one matters. The first is the Eastern Corridor Moscow to Iran via the Caspian Sea, then overland to India, already operational. This is the one the November 2025 train used. The second is the Caspian Sea route, a direct maritime crossing. Technically possible, but lower priority. The third is the Middle Corridor, a Trans-Caspian East-West route that moved 4,100,000 tons in 2024. Impressive, but different purpose. It's complementary, not the main line. Think 3 roads between 2 cities. One is express direct, fast. The second is a longer detour. The third connects different neighborhoods. All useful, but only one handles the main traffic. That's the Eastern. Azerbaijan plays a quiet but essential role. As a Caspian transit hub, it provides crucial port access. But the Eastern Corridor is the star. Why? Because it directly connects 3 strategic powers: Russia, Iran, India. And here's the critical part. There's a bottleneck. A 370-kilometer railway gap still unfinished. It's called the Rasht-Astara Railway. Imagine a 7,000-kilometer highway spanning 3 continents. Everything is ready: tunnels, bridges, checkpoints. Everything works, except for one 370-kilometer stretch. Without it, you have an impressive highway that goes nowhere. With it, a commercial artery that shifts global power. That's Rasht-Astara. But before we talk about fixing that problem, you need to understand why Iran is irreplaceable here. Look at a map. Russia is the starting point. India is the destination. But Iran sits between them. There's no viable overland route that doesn't cross Iranian territory. Iran isn't just participating. It's the land bridge that makes everything possible. And between 2024 and 2026, everything changed. The strategic partnership between Russia and Iran deepened, not just in words, but in concrete infrastructure and confirmed military transfers. Let me be direct. Shahed drones, the same ones Russia uses in Ukraine. They're being transferred from Iran to Russia via the INSTC, not theory. Confirmed. Picture a highway built for commercial trucks. Then shortly after opening, military tanks start using it. The infrastructure hasn't changed, but the mission has. Once military equipment flows, you don't have just a trade route anymore. You have a strategic supply line. The INSTC crossed that line. What started as a commercial corridor is now a military economic artery between Russia and Iran. Two isolated nations are now building an operational axis beyond Western reach. Iran is already expert at sanctions evasion. Decades of experience skirting financial blockades, building parallel systems, trading in local currencies. Now Iran is teaching Russia. And Russia, with its vast resources and geopolitical reach, is scaling those techniques. The result? An economic bloc operating outside Western financial systems, outside SWIFT, outside dollar control, outside surveillance. Here's the geopolitical shift to grasp. Iran went from isolated nation to strategic transit hub. Geography that was a curse became an advantage, but there's still a 370-kilometer gap keeping the eastern corridor from its full potential. That gap is Rashtastara, and Russia just announced it will fund it, a $1.4 billion loan. Construction starts 2026. This isn't a technical detail. It's the final piece clicking into place. Think a 1,000-piece puzzle. You spent years building it. 99% done. One critical piece is missing. Without it, the picture never focuses. With it, everything locks. Rashtastara is that piece. Russia just paid $1.4 billion to install it. Infrastructure experts say the INSTC is about 75% complete overall. Rashtastara is the last critical bottleneck. Timeline? Construction starts 2026. Full operation between 2028 and 2030. 35 million tons per year by 2030. That's the projection. Compare that to 814,000 tons in 2024, a 40-fold increase. To put it in perspective, in 2024, the INSTC moved roughly 20,000 truck equivalents. By 2030, 800,000. 40 times more. Like comparing a neighborhood road to a continental highway. When that happens, the Eastern Corridor isn't an experiment anymore. It's the backbone of an economic bloc that operates without Western approval. But why does India care? Why would Asia's third-largest economy join? India has a problem. It depends heavily on Russian energy and fertilizers. The traditional route to get them runs through the Suez Canal, a route vulnerable to blockades, tariffs, and surveillance. India doesn't want to choose between Western pressure and its economic needs. The INSTC is an alternative. It bypasses Suez completely. Western naval power can't shut it down. The numbers prove it. Trade between Russia, Iran, and India doubled in 2024. Doubled. Not incremental growth. A fundamental shift in trade flows. Here's what makes it permanent. It's not just trade volume, it's parallel financial systems. Russia, Iran, and India transact in local currencies. Ruble, Rial, Rupee. No dollar, no SWIFT. Payment networks operating outside Western financial architecture. Think about it. You can bomb a road. You can blockade a port. But how do you undo an integrated payment system? How do you force three nations back to the dollar once they've proven they can trade without it? You can't. Combine physical infrastructure with independent financial systems, and you don't just have a trade route, you have an economic bloc. Notice what's missing. China. Everyone expected China to lead any challenge to Western order. It's oddly quiet on the INSTC. Why? It's watching, not leading. China has its own Belt and Road Initiative. Geographic overlap with the INSTC exists, but strategic goals differ. Russia builds regional infrastructure to escape Western sanctions. These aren't competing. They're parallel projects with complementary interests. This brings us to a reality few analysts acknowledge. Eurasian trade flows are being permanently reconfigured, not by diplomacy, not by ideology, by concrete, steel, and rails. Physical infrastructure that financial sanctions or UN resolutions can't undo. Once tracks are laid, ports operational, payment systems integrated, reversing it means physical destruction. Nobody's willing to go there. So what does this mean for US hegemony? Let me be blunt. Sanctions work when the target has no alternatives. You own a restaurant. Your supplier cuts you off as punishment. With no other supplier, you close. But what if you'd built your own farm? What if you had agreements with local farmers, created a completely independent supply network? The original supplier can still refuse, but it doesn't matter. You have alternatives. Western sanctions work the same way. They depend on monopolizing choke points. But when the target builds its own infrastructure, creates parallel payment systems, and joins an economic bloc of countries also escaping Western pressure, sanctions don't vanish, but they lose power. Power is what makes hegemony work. The INSTC is more than a transport corridor. It's a model. A Belt and Road template, but Russia-led. The brutal irony? For decades, the US built power by controlling maritime choke points, the Strait of Hormuz, the Suez Canal, the Strait of Malacca. But overland infrastructure bypasses all of that. You can't block a railway without invading territory. You can't monitor local currency transactions like SWIFT transfers. Choke points become meaningless when the opponent avoids them. Let's be clear about post-Western order. It doesn't mean military confrontation. It doesn't mean a new Soviet Union. It means parallel systems, parallel infrastructure, parallel economic blocks, nations trading, financing themselves, operating outside post-Western structures. Think two tech companies. One dominated for decades control standards, platforms, operating systems. Then a competitor shows up. It doesn't attack directly. It builds its own platform, its own standards, its own ecosystem. Users migrate. The old one doesn't collapse. It just loses dominance, becomes less inevitable. That's what's happening to global order. Parallel structures hit critical mass, the old order doesn't explode, it becomes irrelevant. Look at the timeline. 2030. The INSTC operates at full capacity, 35 million tons per year. Rasht Astara complete. Parallel financial systems deeply integrated. Moscow-Mumbai functioning as Eurasia's main commercial artery. Not speculation about the distant future, a permanent shift already underway. Here's what should worry Western strategists. Other regions will copy this. You're a Latin American country. You see Russia bypassing sanctions with overland infrastructure. Iran avoiding SWIFT with local currencies. India shifting trade outside dollars. You think, why can't we? Africa watches how to escape dependence on sea routes controlled by former colonial powers. Southeast Asia seeks alternatives to dollar dominance. The INSTC isn't just Russia, Iran, India. It's proof that infrastructure beats sanctions. Once proven, replication follows. While diplomats debate sanctions and military analysts track ships, real change happens elsewhere. Caspian ports, tracks crossing Iran, local currency payment systems, trade volumes doubling annually. The infrastructure of a Eurasian order that operates without Western permission. And that foundation is 75% complete. The November 2025 train from Moscow wasn't just freight, it was proof. Geographic cage broken, choke points bypassed, sanctions losing power as the target builds its own roads. This isn't the end of Western influence, it's the end of Western inevitability. The end of assuming all trade routes go through Western control points. The end of thinking the dollar and SWIFT are the only options. And maybe more important, the end of believing sea power alone can contain land-based rivals. History. Empires controlling maritime choke points controlled global trade. Until now. There's an alternative, and it's operational. Moving cargo, transferring military drones, doubling trade volumes, building the last piece with a $1.4 billion loan. You're witnessing more than a transport corridor. You're witnessing the infrastructure of a multipolar order. Unlike speeches or agreements that get torn up, physical infrastructure stays. Once tracks are laid, ports operational, payment systems integrated, change is permanent. Timeline is 2030, 6 years away. Not distant future, it's now. When that milestone hits, the geopolitical map changes in ways sanctions can't reverse. You can't sanction rails. You can't block railways without invading. And you can't dismantle an economic bloc that's already built its own trade arteries. Will the Caspian corridor destroy US hegemony forever? Not as dramatically as the headline suggests. But will it permanently shift the balance of power? Set a precedent others follow? Prove infrastructure defeats sanctions? Yes. It's already happening. If you want to understand how the world changes, don't watch headlines about military conflicts or diplomacy. Watch where tracks are laid, where ports expand, where parallel payment systems integrate. That's where real power rebuilds. That's where the next global order forms. One road, one port, one rail at a time. And the November 2025 train was just the start.